I mean, there's no room for opinion here. It is an absolute fact that the fossil fuel industry has had a very sophisticated and expensive PR campaign for probably 3 decades, convincing us that the climate crisis is a suicide rather than a homicide. And we bought it. And we all blame ourselves. And there's no doubt in my mind that that's why you're seeing this data. And there's no doubt in my mind that that's why you're all frustrated. And oh my God, do I share your frustration. Yeah, this makes me angry as hell. However, it would be even worse if we got all this polling data back and we were like, yeah, no one cares about climate change at all. That would suck, right? Like that's a much harder problem to solve. And yeah, this is frustrating. I don't deny it, but it is an opportunity. These are people who don't need to be persuaded to care deeply about climate change. They're already there. They need to be politicized. Now, to get to the second part of the question, I think we now need to think of potential targets for the climate movement in three buckets. One, persuasion targets, more sort of typical persuasion targets, people who need to be convinced to care more about climate change. That's not the work that EVP does. Two, people who list climate change as their number one political priority. So they already think it's their number one political priority, yet they aren't voting. That's what EVP focuses on. So we don't need to politicize those people, at least not in the typical sense of that word. They already know that this is the number one political issue for them, but they still suck at voting. The way to address that problem is through what EVP does. We canvass, we call, we mail, we send postcards, we do digital ads, all with behavioral science informed messaging that our randomized control trials prove increases turnout. If you go to our results page, I'd appreciate it if someone could put that link in the chat. You will find all of these randomized control trials proving that we know what messaging to deliver to these people to get them to vote. And the weird thing is, Brian and others, usually it's messaging that has nothing to do with climate or the environment. Usually it has to do with using forms of peer pressure and things like that to get them to vote. All right, now there's this third bucket. Now there's this other group of people that the climate movement may have to think about messaging to, who care deeply about climate change, don't think of it as their top political issue. And so maybe they're voting, maybe they're not voting, but they certainly don't view it as a politically salient issue yet. And I want to be honest with you. This is not something that the Environmental Voter Project is going to focus on. This is something that huge PR campaigns and big public advocacy groups are much better at doing. We have already identified at EVP almost 12 million of these non-voting environmentalists who do list climate as their number one political priority. That's a great opportunity, and we're really good at turning them into voters. This other group, I can tell you what I think the climate movement needs to do, but I don't want to mislead you into thinking that EVP is going to completely change our mission and add on a whole nother thing that we do. This is not our area of expertise, but we're pretty smart when it comes to researching how voters think, and we wanted to share these findings and continue sharing these findings with people. Right off the top of my head, some things that I think are really important is we are a storytelling species. It's what makes us unique among all the other species on Earth, is that we tell stories, and those stories allow us to collaborate and cooperate and do enormous things. Win world wars, go to the moon, things like that. Solve global pandemics. Right now, the story archetype of the climate crisis, and I'm not going to go into the like 7 or 8 broad story archetypes, but it's a story we're all used to. It's a story of hubris. It's like the story of Icarus. It's the story of a species that just did too much and killed themselves because they were selfish or stupid or had so much hubris. That's a story we know. It's almost hardwired into our brains. And the climate crisis story that we tell ourselves really fits in that archetype. And boy, does that help us think of individual solutions to what is clearly not an individual problem. For my money, we need to shift to a different archetype. We need to shift to the type of story that is a hero overcoming a villain or a monster. This is more commonly known as the protagonist antagonist, where there is a value. There is good, there is bad, there is a value. We as a group come together, defeat the villain, defeat the antagonist, and achieve the promised land or achieve the goal. That is also a story that we are used to. That is an archetype that we know deep down in our veins. That is how we need to start thinking about politicizing people who care deeply about climate change. We need to get them out of thinking about this as a suicide and into thinking of this as a homicide. But again, I don't want to mislead any of you into thinking that this is EVP changing our focus. This isn't. What this is EVP, a cutting edge, enormously successful, and I'll be honest, really friggin' good voter turnout organization, stumbling upon some really useful data that we want to shout to the rooftops so that everybody else who is good at persuasion messaging can take advantage of it. And that's why we really do encourage many of you to reach out to us after this if you want to talk about this and ideas for further research.